Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Chinyu sat by the edge of her iron-framed bed in a dimly lit one-room apartment she called home. The scent of detergent still clung to her hands from the clothes she had washed earlier, not for herself, but for Toby, the man she loved with every broken piece of her heart. Her salary as an office cleaner in a logistics company barely sustained her, yet she found ways to make sure Toby never went to bed hungry. She knew poverty like she knew pain. They were daily companions, but somehow, loving Toby made it all feel purposeful. To the world, Toby was just another unemployed dreamer. But to Chinyu, he was her destiny, her future husband, the man whose business idea would change their lives if only someone believed in him. And so she did, blindly, fiercely, and at her own expense. While her body ached from cleaning floors and scrubbing toilets, she saved every coin to buy him airtime, lunch, transport, and at times even clothes. She remembered the first time she gave him her entire salary. Her boss had just paid her, and she had planned to buy a second-hand phone to replace the cracked one she used for years. But when Toby called that evening, complaining that he had a meeting with a potential investor and couldn't go looking like a nobody, she handed it all to him, without hesitation. She even smiled as she lied to herself, saying love was about sacrifice. Chinyu's kind of love wasn't transactional, it was tragic. She carried Toby like a burden and a prayer, ignoring the red flags as long as he gave her the illusion that he cared. He didn't have a job, but he had pride. He didn't have money, but he had expectations, and Chinyu bent herself to meet them. She woke early to cook, even packed his meals with motivational notes, believing that someday, when his business finally took off, he would remember her faith in him. But he never said thank you, and each day he grew colder. The community whispered about her foolishness. A cleaner who wants to build a man, they would laugh. Even her coworkers mocked her when she sold her gold-plated chain for Toby's transport. But Chinyu had learned to wear shame like perfume, close to her skin but masked with a fake smile. The only moments she felt wanted were when Toby needed sex. He would speak sweetly, touch her like she mattered, and then disappear into indifference afterward. She held on to those few seconds of attention, building castles out of crumbs. She didn't mind walking home under the rain if it meant he ate a decent meal. She didn't mind skipping her own lunch as long as Toby felt respected around his friends. She thought maybe someday they would all see how far she went for him, how deep her love ran. But love was never enough, and Chinyu didn't know that yet. She was too busy patching holes in Toby's boat while drowning silently in her own emptiness. Chinyu had always been a rule follower. Raised in a modest household where integrity was upheld even when food was scarce, she once believed that hard work and honesty were the keys to a good life. But love, or rather, desperation wrapped in love, had taught her otherwise. The first time she took N5000 from her boss's drawer, her hands shook so violently she nearly passed out. It was a Friday, and Toby had told her his business meeting with a supplier in Acadia would make or break everything. He cried that morning, holding his head, frustrated that he was so close, yet helpless. Chinyu believed him. She believed every lie he coated with affection, every manipulation he masked as ambition. That night, she cried herself to sleep, guilt by what she had done, but comforted by the idea that it was all for their future. She would return the money soon, she told herself. After all, once Toby's deal came through, they would pay back everything, and more. But the money didn't come back. Toby's supplier turned out to be a man who vanished after collecting the money. Chinyu's boss, an uptight woman with zero tolerance for incompetence, began auditing every staff closely. Security cameras were being checked, locks were changed, and rumors of a theft investigation began to circulate. Chinyu became a shadow of herself. Her hands trembled whenever she passed her boss's office. Every knock on the gate made her heart race, thinking the police had finally come for her. Yet despite the growing danger, she didn't stop. Toby needed more money for his next attempt. "That's how business works," he would say. "You win some, lose some." But it was always her losing, her dignity, her job, her peace. She stopped visiting her mother for fear of being questioned about her tired eyes and sunken cheeks. The once vibrant girl who dreamed of opening her own cleaning company someday now barely made it through the week without sobbing into her pillow. One evening, she begged Toby to consider getting a job, any job, just to ease the burden. His face twisted with irritation. "You want me to wash cars?" he barked. "Do you know who I am? I'm building something great here, Chinyu. All I need is a woman who believes in me, not one that doubts me when things are rough." The irony stung like pepper in an open wound. She, who had stolen and sacrificed everything, was now being accused of disbelief. But Chinyu apologized again. She cooked him egusi soup that night and massaged his feet, still clinging to the idea that one day he would see how much she had given. But love, when one-sided, becomes a poison. Chinyu was slowly dying, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And she didn't even realize it. The more she gave, the more he took. And like a gambler at a rigged table, she kept betting on a love that had no intention of returning her investment. It was a Sunday morning when Chinyu's landlord shouted her name from outside. She had defaulted on her rent again, the third month in a row. As she tied her wrapper hurriedly and stepped out, the stares from other tenants stabbed into her skin. "Is this how you'll follow a man until shame kills you?" a neighbor whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Chinyu didn't respond. She had grown numb to the insults. But what hurt most was returning home to Toby's silence. He didn't ask how she would sort the rent. He didn't offer to help. Instead, he told her to go and beg that your useless boss again for a salary advance. Chinyu, humiliated beyond words, obeyed. Her boss didn't give her an advance, but gave her a final warning instead. "One more slip and you're fired." That night, Chinyu stood before a mirror, staring at a reflection she no longer recognized. Her eyes, once full of hope, now looked hollow. She had become a ghost of the woman she once dreamed she'd be. Weeks later, Toby announced he had finally secured a breakthrough. A business partner had agreed to invest in his idea, and things would change soon. Chinyu's heart leaped with joy. Maybe the suffering had not been in vain. Toby even kissed her forehead and called her his future queen. It was the first kind thing he had said in months. He asked her to join him at a small ceremony the following week to meet the new investor. Chinyu borrowed clothes from her colleague and braided her hair with the last N1000 she had. She didn't eat that day, hoping to look her best. But when they arrived, Toby introduced her as an old friend. Not a girlfriend. Not the woman who had given him everything. Just a friend. Chinyu smiled through the pain, clapping when they toasted to the future. But her heart broke into pieces that night, and Toby didn't even notice. She walked home alone while he stayed behind to network. Still, Chinyu held on. She told herself that once they were married, things would change. Marriage would bind him to her, finally give her the respect she deserved. She didn't know that the altar would be the place where her dreams would be slaughtered. Toby continued planning the wedding half-heartedly. He never took her to meet his investor. He said his new associates wanted professional appearances. Chinyu began sewing her wedding gown with her own hands, patching it at night after work. She didn't want anything grand, just a quiet day with the man she loved. But the man she loved was slowly becoming someone else, someone she didn't recognize, someone who had long stopped seeing her worth. Her love had paid for his climb, but she didn't realize yet that he never planned to take her to the top with him. Chinyu had heard horror stories of women fighting to be accepted by their in-laws, but she never imagined her own reality would mirror those tales in such cruelty. From the very first day she met Toby's mother, Mama Alyurimi looked her over like expired goods. "Cleaner? So this is the one you want to marry," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Toby had laughed it off, nudging his mother lightly and calling her dramatic. Chinyu forced a smile, hiding how deeply those words cut. She tried hard to win their approval. Every Sunday after church, she would visit Mama Alyurimi with groceries, cooked soup, and sometimes cash from her tiny salary. She helped sweep the compound, bathed Toby's younger cousins, and offered to wash their clothes. Still, she was treated like an outsider, disposable, unwanted. Mama Alyurimi called her the help in front of visitors, while Toby never corrected her. Instead, he would shrug and tell Chinyu, "That's just how she is." She tried to bond with Toby's sisters, thinking that female solidarity would offer her comfort. But it was like trying to hug shadows. They were present, but cold. When Chinyu gifted one of them a blouse she bought from the roadside, the girl scoffed and tossed it aside. "Nah, your level be this, a beg. Me way day find real man, no get your dime." These words echoed in Chinyu's ears for days. She once cooked a special pot of egusi soup for the entire family, spending her last $500 to make it perfect, only for them to complain it lacked seasoning. That evening, as she washed the dishes in silence, Toby played a game on his phone and laughed with his siblings in the parlor. No one thanked her. No one even acknowledged the effort. Still, she told herself that they would grow to love her, that once she married Toby, things would change, that the suffering was just a rite of passage for women who wanted to be called wife. But the pain only deepened. Chinyu once overheard Mama Alyurimi on the phone, laughing with someone. "He will soon leave that one. He just use and manage until better woman show face." Chinyu choked on her tears that night. She wanted to walk away, to leave all the insults and thankless sacrifice behind. But her heart was a prisoner of hope. She had invested too much to back out now. Every insult, every slight, every cruel laugh. She endured it all because she believed that when Toby finally succeeded, when his business picked up, he would turn around and defend her, reward her loyalty, and shame those who looked down on her. What she didn't realize was that Toby's silence in the face of their disrespect wasn't temporary. It was a reflection of his true allegiance. And she was the only one who still believed in a fantasy that had long died in his heart. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just after lunch break. Chinyu had gone into the main office to drop off a folder when she noticed the drawer slightly open. Her boss had stepped out for a meeting, and the envelope with petty cash lay just inside. Her heart pounded. Rent was due. Toby needed money for urgent supplies, and there was nothing left at home. Her last salary had gone into buying foodstuffs for Mama Alyurimi and a second-hand shoe for Toby's sister. The weight of desperation sat on her chest like a stone. Without thinking too hard, Chinyu reached in, took N10000, and slipped it into her waistband. She left quickly, but her body trembled the entire afternoon. What she didn't know was that a new surveillance camera had been installed the previous week, and it had caught everything. By closing time, her boss's secretary asked her to stay back. The next 20 minutes would haunt Chinyu forever. "Thief," her boss screamed, slamming her palm on the desk. "After everything I've done to keep you here despite your low qualifications, you pay me by stealing?" Chinyu dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She tried to explain, but how could she say she did it for a man who wouldn't even hold her hand in public? How could she confess that she had risked everything because she believed love was reason enough to betray herself? The boss's voice rose, calling other staff to come and see the rat in human skin. Chinyu begged, humiliated beyond words. She wasn't just fired, she was shamed. The story spread fast. By the next day, people in the compound where she lived were whispering. Children pointed at her and called her old, and women she once lent money now crossed the street to avoid her. Toby didn't even come to see her that night. He said he was busy working on a major deal. When he finally showed up 3 days later, he brought no food, no comfort, just blame. "So you couldn't even do it smartly? Now look at you disgraced," he said coldly. Chinyu stared at him in disbelief. There was no empathy, no remorse, only irritation that she had embarrassed him. She had never felt so alone. Her world was collapsing, and the one person she thought would catch her was now watching her fall. Still, she said nothing. She cooked him yam porridge and sat quietly while he ate and watched football. She even massaged his shoulders afterward, hoping he would say something kind. But he stood up, picked up his bag, and left without looking back. That night, Chinyu sat in darkness, no electricity, no job, no joy. She wrapped herself in her bedsheet and cried into the silence. The cost of loving Toby had become unbearable, But she had paid so much already, she didn't know how to stop. Chinyu tried selling fruits by the roadside to survive. She borrowed N5000 from a neighbor and bought oranges and bananas, sitting under the scorching sun with a small table. She wrapped her face in a scarf to hide from those who would recognize her. Yet even there, shame found her. From office to fruit stand, someone mocked as they passed. But Chinyu kept sitting, kept selling. It was better than starving. Toby rarely called anymore. When he did, it was only to ask for help or tell her to be patient. She once begged him to stay the night when she was ill and shivering with fever. He told her he had a business call early in the morning. Chinyu lay on the cold floor that night, hugging herself, trying to believe that this suffering was building something meaningful, something worth enduring. Her mother had always said, "Good women endure, even when the world turns its back." But Chinyu was starting to question whether this was strength or just foolishness disguised as hope. The wedding was still being planned, at least on paper. Toby insisted they keep it small due to limited funds, but Chinyu had already made her gown. She had bought it piece by piece from the market with whatever savings she had left. She kept it in a small nylon bag under her bed, bringing it out at night to admire. Sometimes she would hold it close, imagining her wedding day, imagining Toby smiling as he vowed to love her. That vision was the only thing that kept her alive. But with each passing day, Toby grew more distant. He began spending time with a woman named Clara, someone he claimed was just a business partner. Chinyu saw photos of them online, laughing at a beach resort. When she asked him about it, he shouted, "So you now stalk me? That's why no man wants you. You're too clingy." She apologized again. She had gotten used to apologizing for breathing, for needing, for loving too much. Yet deep within her, a storm was brewing. The suffering was taking something from her, not just dignity, but the very essence of who she used to be. Her silence was no longer strength. It was survival. Each insult, each rejection, was carving her into someone else. But she didn't realize that pain was also shaping her into something stronger. She still believed in the wedding, still dreamed that once the vows were said, all of it would make sense. Love would redeem her. Toby would become the man she saw in her dreams. But fate had other plans, crueler, sharper, and more revealing than she could ever imagine. And though she didn't know it yet, the altar would not be a place of union, but a stage for her greatest heartbreak, one the world would never forget. The days leading up to the wedding were supposed to be filled with joy, laughter, and anticipation, but for Chinyu, they were drenched in silence, fear, and loneliness. Toby had grown more distant than ever. He barely picked her calls, and when he did, his voice was cold, impatient, and always in a hurry. "I'm busy, Chinyu. This business deal could change our lives. Stop acting like a child," he snapped one night when she asked him if they could pray together for their wedding. The warmth he once faked had now been replaced with indifference. He no longer came around, not even to finalize the wedding logistics. Chinyu handled everything. The food, the church arrangements, the borrowed hall, the second-hand ring. Her dress was still wrapped under her bed, untouched and uncelebrated. She spoke to it more than she spoke to her groom-to-be. Every time she pulled it out at night, she whispered to herself, "Just one more week. He'll come around." But the signs were everywhere. Clara, the so-called business partner, was now constantly posting pictures with Toby on social media. Chinyu's friends had stopped sending congratulations and had begun sending screenshots instead. "Be careful. This girl day too close to your man," one text read. But Chinyu would delete the messages and pretend they didn't exist. Denial had become her coping mechanism. She clung to her hope like a drowning woman clung to a floating stick. It didn't matter that the stick was splintered and weak. It was all she had. She convinced herself that the moment Toby stood before the altar with her, everything would click into place. She had suffered enough. She had earned her happy ending. Sometimes in the middle of the night, she would cry quietly, holding her belly as if grief lived there. Still, she told herself that love was worth enduring for, that once Toby was successful, he would remember who held him up in the dark. But something deeper within her had begun to shift. She no longer smiled at herself in the mirror. She avoided reflections altogether. Her laughter had vanished. Her weight had dropped. Her skin was pale, her eyes red. Her colleagues had stopped asking how the wedding was going. The silence around her engagement spoke louder than words. Even her former boss, the one who fired her, passed by her fruit stand one afternoon, gave her a long, pitying look, and said nothing. Chinyu felt like a walking shadow of the woman she once was. She had given her heart, body, mind, soul, and even her crime to a man who treated her like an option. And despite all this, she still told herself, he's just under pressure. Business is tough. He'll come back to me. What she didn't realize was that Toby wasn't under pressure. He had made a choice. And that choice didn't include her. It was meant to be the happiest day of her life. Chinyu woke up before dawn, her heart pounding with anxious excitement. She didn't have bridesmaids or a professional makeup artist, but she did her best. She styled her hair into a neat bun, applied a little powder, and wore her white gown with trembling hands. Her cousin, who agreed to be her witness, kept checking the time. The small hall they had borrowed from a local community center was already filling up with guests, mostly her neighbors, a few coworkers, and the church choir. She kept checking her phone. No message from Toby. No missed calls. She called his line, and it rang unanswered. But still she smiled. She told everyone he was on his way. She sat nervously at the front pew, gripping her bouquet of plastic flowers, rehearsing the words, "I do," over and over in her mind. When 30 minutes passed, the whispers began. When an hour passed, the guests started murmuring. And then, the worst happened. Toby walked in, not dressed in a tuxedo, but in a casual shirt and trousers. He didn't walk up to the altar. He stood at the entrance, flanked by Clara and 2 other men. The entire hall turned to him. Chinyu's heart nearly stopped. She stood, smiling nervously. "Baby," she called out. But Toby raised a hand. "Let's not waste everyone's time," he began, his voice cold and sharp. "I can't marry a thief." The silence in the room turned into gasps. This girl stole from her boss to feed me. I didn't ask her to do it. Now people are calling me names, saying I'm a fraudster because of her. I can't continue like this. Chinyu's knees buckled. Her bouquet fell. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her cousin rushed to hold her, but she was already trembling violently. Toby turned around, grabbed Clara's hand, and walked out of the hall without looking back. The church was stunned. People began whispering, some shaking their heads, others leaving quietly. Chinyu stood at the altar alone, tears blinding her, shame drowning her. The pastor walked away. The choir stopped singing. The guests vanished one by one. In less than 30 minutes, her future evaporated. The plastic flowers fell to the ground, crushed by the feet of those exiting. Chinyu collapsed into the chair beside her, makeup ruined, veil falling off. Her cousin held her, trying to calm her shaking body, but Chinyu could not hear anything. Her ears rang with the words, "I can't marry a thief." Over and over, her heart cracked into pieces too sharp to pick up. That was the moment she knew she had not just lost a man, she had lost herself, her dreams, her dignity, all in front of people who would never forget her disgrace. The days that followed were worse than nightmares. Chinyu stayed locked in her room for 3 days, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. Her cousin tried her best, but Chinyu was unreachable, a silent shell consumed by heartbreak and humiliation. The wedding dress lay in a corner, stained with dirt and tears, like a relic of betrayal. News of her altered disgrace had spread like wildfire. Her neighbors would peep through the window, whispering and pointing. The women in her street laughed mockingly when she passed. Cleaner turned criminal turned dumped bride. One of them hissed. Chinyu could not even defend herself. What could she say? That she stole to feed a man who now walked hand in hand with another woman? That she was left like trash on the altar after building him from nothing? The shame was too thick to breathe through. She wanted to vanish. Worse still, her family turned their backs on her. Her elder brother called to say she had embarrassed them. Her mother said, "I warned you, but you were too stubborn." No one asked if she was eating, if she was alive. The one person she expected to reach out, Toby, never did. She saw more photos online of him and Clara launching a new logistics company. She recognized the business name. It was the same one she had brainstormed with him one night, scribbled on a napkin after making indomie for dinner. He had taken even her ideas and left her with nothing. Chinyu began to consider suicide. She stared at the ceiling fan every night, imagining what it would feel like to simply stop breathing. But each time, she thought of her late father and how he always said, "When you reach rock bottom, dig, don't bury yourself." And so, on the fourth day, Chinyu rose. She bathed slowly. She burned the wedding dress. She deleted all Toby's photos. She packed her few belongings and moved out of her cousin's place. With the last N3000 she had, she found a small wooden kiosk at the edge of a busy market and began selling akara and pap. She didn't care if people recognized her. She didn't care if they mocked her. Something inside her had broken, yes, but something else had been reborn. The Chinyu who once needed love to feel whole had died. The one who remained was broken, bruised, but determined. She whispered to herself every night, "I may not rise today, but I will rise." And somewhere in the chaos of her pain, the first seeds of her redemption had begun to take root. Each morning, Chinyu rose before the sun, lit her charcoal stove, and began preparing akara and pap with trembling hands. Her body still bore the signs of the stress: dark circles under her eyes, weight loss, skin dulled by malnourishment. But her spirit, though battered, clung desperately to survival. With every spoonful of beans she scooped into the hot oil, she reminded herself that her life wasn't over, just severely broken. The women around her gossiped, laughed, sometimes pointed, but she didn't respond. She focused on peeling onions, frying, and counting change. On good days, she sold out before noon. On bad days, she packed unsold leftovers and ate them in silence. She had no time to cry anymore. Tears had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Her grief was now internalized, buried deep beneath the folds of her everyday hustle. She worked not to succeed, but to stay sane. At night, the pain returned in whispers. She would lie awake, remembering the altar, Toby's voice calling her a thief, the laughter that followed her exit from the hall. Sometimes, she would grip her chest, as if she could physically pull the hurt out. She didn't attend church anymore. The judgmental glances were too much. The streets were no kinder. Women selling beside her made rude jokes, customers asked insensitive questions, and even children laughed when they saw her. The shame lingered like a dark cloud, and Chinyu bore it all in silence. Her cousin occasionally visited, bringing clothes and moral support, but Chinyu was too wounded to engage deeply. Her soul had shut its doors. She no longer believed in happy endings. Love was a myth. Men were users. She now saw life as something to be endured, not enjoyed. She didn't know it yet, but her story was far from over. One afternoon, the heavens opened and poured rain so violently that her stall flooded. She sat there, soaked and shivering, watching her akara float away in the flood. Customers ran for shelter, and other vendors closed shop. But Chinyu remained, arms wrapped around her knees, staring blankly into the street. A man with an umbrella approached, offering to help her pack. She declined. "I'm used to the mess," she whispered. But he stayed, helping her regardless. He introduced himself as Ikena, a struggling electronics dealer who had a small shop nearby. He didn't recognize her past, didn't treat her like gossip. He simply handed her a hot meat pie and said, "You look like you needed something warm." Chinyu didn't respond, but the warmth of the gesture settled in her bones. That night, she ate slowly, chewing through tears. For the first time in weeks, someone had treated her like a human being, not a cautionary tale. Ikena became a familiar face in the days that followed. Each morning, he would stop by Chinyu's kiosk, buy akara and pap, and ask how her night went. He never lingered too long, never forced conversation, just smiled warmly and paid generously. Chinyu, still recovering emotionally, was guarded. She didn't want kindness. It felt like a setup. But she couldn't ignore how different he was. He asked nothing of her, didn't flirt, didn't pity her. One day, when her burner failed and she had no means to cook, Ikena offered his small generator for the day. She initially refused, but he insisted. "We small people have to help each other," he said. It wasn't the words that moved her, but the sincerity behind them. Chinyu hadn't heard anything kind, without conditions, since the disaster of her failed wedding. Slowly, she began to trust him, not with her heart, but with her presence. One afternoon, while they shared roasted corn during a quiet break, Ikena opened up about his own struggles. He had poured his savings into a partnership that failed, leaving him with debt and disappointment. He told her about sleeping in his shop at times to save on transport, about hiding from his landlord when rent was due. Chinyu listened, nodding silently. For once, she wasn't the only broken one in the room. There was something disarming about Ikena's honesty. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't selling a dream. He was just surviving, just like her. That night, Chinyu cried, not from pain, but from a strange feeling of being understood. Her walls hadn't crumbled, but they had cracked. For the first time since Toby left her at the altar, Chinyu didn't feel alone. Still, she didn't allow her emotions to run wild. Trauma had taught her not to trust too quickly. She kept Ikena at arm's length, refusing invitations to hang out or visit his shop. But his consistency was hard to ignore. Every morning he showed up, whether it rained or not. He brought her small gifts sometimes, fruit, batteries, even slippers. Nothing expensive, but always thoughtful. One day, she noticed him standing outside, watching her from a distance before approaching. "I hope you don't mind me being around. I just feel like when I'm close to you, things are not so heavy," he said. Chinny didn't reply, but those words stayed with her. That night, she prayed again, something she hadn't done in weeks. Not for love, not for success, just for peace. And without knowing it, her broken heart had started to beat again. Chinyu's newfound peace was fragile, but it grew quietly. She and Ikena began talking more, sharing life stories in small, safe doses. One day, Ikena brought up an idea to restructure his struggling business, but he didn't know where to begin. Chinyu, drawing from her days working under her boss, offered suggestions: inventory management, marketing flyers, partnership ideas. Her mind, long dulled by suffering, came alive again. She began helping him in the evenings after closing her stall. She wrote sales plans in a small notebook, and even designed a simple customer loyalty card scheme using colored paper. Ikena was amazed. "You're brilliant," he said one evening, watching her sketch out a pricing model. Chinyu smiled shyly. No one had ever called her that. Not Toby, not her boss, not even her parents. She had been reduced to roles: cleaner, thief, dump bride. But now she was something else: useful, intelligent, valued. But the ghosts of her past still lingered. She feared that if she gave too much of herself again, she would be betrayed. Sometimes, when Ikena touched her shoulder or laughed too hard, she recoiled slightly. The scars Toby left weren't physical, but they were deep. Ikena noticed. One day, after a long evening of working together, he said gently, "Whatever he did to you, I see the wounds. But I'm not him, and I'll wait as long as it takes." Chinyu broke down crying. She told him everything: the theft, the altar disgrace, the abandonment. She confessed her shame, her regret, her fear of loving again. Ikena didn't interrupt. He just sat beside her, holding her hand. When she finished, he whispered, "You're not a mistake. You're a miracle. You're still standing." It was the first time she truly felt safe since her fall. From that day on, their bond changed. It was no longer cautious, it was intentional. Chinyu still ran her kiosk, but now with more pride. She started dressing better, combing her hair, even smiling at customers. Ikena's business began to pick up too. He insisted on crediting Chinyu for the growth, introducing her to his clients as "my business consultant." They laughed more, worked more, and healed more. One night, under the moonlight in front of her kiosk, Ikena asked, "Do you think you could ever love again?" Chinyu looked at him, heart pounding. "I was raised to love completely," she said softly. "I just forgot for a while." He smiled, took her hand, and said, "Then let's remember together." And for the first time in a long time, Chinyu's heart didn't ache, it hoped. Despite the soft light of new hope flickering in her life, Chinyu still struggled with fear. Each time Ikena held her hand for too long or looked at her with eyes that mirrored sincerity, a dark memory of Toby would crawl back into her mind. She would suddenly flinch, retreat, or find an excuse to busy herself. The trauma hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone silent. She often found herself questioning her own worth, wondering if Ikena's kindness was just another form of pity. It was hard for her to believe that someone could see her broken pieces and not use them against her. She sometimes stayed awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying all the moments where she had let her guard down with Toby. The sacrifices, the humiliation, the betrayal. Her scars were emotional, but they had hardened her heart in ways that weren't easy to reverse. And though Ikena's presence was healing, the pain from her past often cast long shadows across her future. Ikena, for his part, remained patient. He never demanded more than she could offer. Instead of pushing her toward romance, he walked beside her in friendship, quietly giving her space while still showing up. He would leave flowers in front of her kiosk early in the morning. Nothing fancy, just local ones wrapped in nylon, with a note saying "For your courage." One day he brought her a framed quote that read, "You are allowed to outgrow the people who couldn't see your light." Chinyu cried when she saw it. Not because of the gesture, but because she realized someone finally saw her, not as a cleaner, not as a thief, not as a used woman, but as a full human being with value. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel again. She began meeting Ikena for lunch, sometimes laughing, without fear. She let him walk her home. She even told him about her dreams to start a small cleaning agency one day, and instead of mocking her, he asked for a business plan. Their friendship began to blossom into something deeper, though still unspoken. One day, as they walked by a market, a woman who once mocked Chinyu called out, "Aha! Is this not the bride that was dumped on her wedding day?" The insult stung, and Chinyu froze. Ikena turned, walked up to the woman, and said, "Yes, she is. And now she's the reason my life is working." Then he took Chinyu's hand and walked away. Chinyu didn't say a word. But her silence was not weakness, it was power. For the first time, someone had stood up for her publicly, without shame. That night, when Ikena walked her home, she turned and hugged him tightly. No words, just a long, tearful embrace that said, "I'm trying." It wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the rebuilding of a woman who was learning that she could be loved, not because she suffered, but in spite of it. Months passed, and Chinyu's life began to gain new rhythm. The Acura stall she once opened out of desperation had now become a popular stop for early morning workers. Her customers, once curious or mocking, now called her Madam Chinyu, with respect. She expanded her offerings, adding moin moin and custard to the menu, all prepared with meticulous care. Ikena had helped her build a small wooden canopy so she could operate during the rainy season. They worked together like a team, each offering what the other lacked. When Ikena needed help with accounting, Chinyu used her old office skills to organize his books. When she ran out of supplies, he helped with delivery. They weren't lovers in the way people expected, but their bond was deeper than anything Chinyu had ever experienced. It was safe. It was consistent. And most of all, it wasn't performative. He didn't love her in front of others to be praised. He loved her in the quiet moments, the simple gestures. One Saturday evening, Ikena surprised her with a small celebration. He had invited a few close friends and customers to his shop and decorated it with balloons and handwritten signs that read, "To the woman who saved my business." There was no alcohol, no loud music, just food, laughter, and heartfelt testimonies. When it was Ikena's turn to speak, he stood in front of the gathering and said, "I was ready to close this shop. I thought I had lost everything. Then this woman came into my life and didn't just give me advice. She gave me belief. She gave me faith when I had none. And I want to say thank you, Chinyu, for teaching me how to fight again." The crowd clapped, and Chinyu covered her face in tears. No one had ever spoken about her like that. Not even her own family. She felt seen, not as a shadow of a scandal, but as a story of strength. That night, after the celebration, Ikena walked her home under the moonlight. He stopped at her gate and held her hand. I don't know what the future holds, Chinyu, he said gently. But I know that if I face it with you, I won't be afraid. She didn't respond immediately. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. The fear, the memories, the pain, they all tried to scream at her to run. But this time, she chose differently. She looked him in the eyes and whispered, I was once buried in shame. You helped me bloom again. Then, slowly, she leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. They stood in silence, letting the night hold them. And for the first time since her world collapsed, Chinyu didn't feel like a victim of her past. She felt like the author of a new beginning. Healing is not a straight road, and Chinyu understood this better than anyone. Some days she woke up energized, filled with purpose, smiling at the sun. Other days she cried in the shower, triggered by the smell of beans or the sound of a voice that reminded her of Toby. Trauma doesn't disappear, it just becomes quieter, more distant. She still avoided weddings, still tensed when she saw tuxedos, still avoided that street where she was once disgraced. But now she had tools. She had moments of joy, people who respected her, a man who saw her value, and work that gave her dignity. Each morning, when she opened her stall, she prayed softly, not asking for riches, just for strength, for peace. And slowly, she began to believe that she was deserving of both. She didn't try to erase the past anymore. She carried it like a badge of survival. Because she had endured and emerged stronger. Ikenna and Chinyu's relationship evolved into something beautiful and real. It wasn't rushed and it wasn't loud. It was a gentle unfolding, one that involved conversations about pain, laughter over little things, and the rebuilding of two people who had once been torn apart by life. Chinyu helped Ikenna secure a small grant through a business challenge she found online. With the money, they expanded the shop, bought new stock, and rebranded. They even gave their partnership a name, New Light Ventures. One day, as they painted the signboard together, Chinyu paused and said, I never thought my name would be on anything except gossip blogs. Ikenna smiled and replied, now it's on a business that's feeding families. It was moments like that, quiet and grounded, that reminded Chinyu that real love doesn't always arrive with roses and promises. Sometimes it shows up wearing work boots and carrying a paintbrush. The community around them began to take notice. The woman once mocked for being dumped on her wedding day was now hiring workers, managing accounts, and offering free business seminars to other women who had once struggled like her. Her transformation was undeniable, and her humility made her even more magnetic. She didn't seek revenge or validation. She simply lived her truth. But the universe has a way of circling back. And one rainy afternoon, a visitor would show up at their shop, ragged, broke, and desperate. It was a face Chinyu once loved, a name that once brought her to her knees. Toby had returned, and this time the tables were no longer just turned, they were shattered. The storm she had once drowned in had become the flood that lifted her to shore. And now she would face her past, not as a victim, but as a woman who had risen. The rain that day was heavy, thundering against the iron roofs like a warning. Chinyu was inside New Light Ventures' office space, a small extension beside Ikenna's electronics store, working on staff schedules when one of the shop assistants called out to her. A man day outside say, E1C manager. Chinyu, still holding her pen, didn't think much of it. Ask him to wait, she said calmly. She continued her work, oblivious to the storm that was about to enter, not the one outside, but the one wrapped in flesh and shame. When she finally stepped outside with her clipboard, her feet froze. Standing in the rain, drenched and shivering, was Toby. He looked nothing like the confident man who once called her a thief at the altar. His clothes were worn, shoes dusty, face leaner and aged. Chinyu stood still for several seconds, heart thumping. The universe had brought him back, not for vengeance, but for a lesson. Toby looked up, and their eyes met. Shame immediately filled his. Chinyu, he whispered, his voice barely louder than the rain. Please. I'm sorry. Her staff watched in silence, sensing something deeper than a customer dispute. Ikenna stepped outside too, noticing her frozen stance. When he saw Toby, he moved closer and gently placed his hand on Chinyu's back. It was all the reassurance she needed. She took a deep breath, then turned to one of the assistants. "Get him an umbrella and a seat at the back. Let me finish up." Toby was escorted in like any other job applicant. No drama, no reaction. Chinyu walked back into her office and closed the door. But inside, her heart trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of how far she had come. The girl who once cried over Toby's insults now owned a desk he had to sit beside and ask for mercy. Her growth wasn't loud, it was poetic. An hour later, Chinyu called him in. He sat opposite her like a student before a principal. She didn't speak immediately. She just looked at him. And in that silence, Toby began to cry. "I lost everything, Chinyu. Clara took my business money. I was scammed by people I trusted. My family threw me out. I have nothing. I didn't come here to beg for love. I just want a job. Anything. Even if it's to sweep this place." His voice broke again. "I've wronged you. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need help. Please." Chinyu stared at him, her eyes still and unreadable. She thought of the nights she starved so he could eat, the shame he poured on her at the altar, the laughter he shared with Clara while she bled emotionally. Yet she didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. Calmly, she stood and said, "Report here at 7 a.m. tomorrow. The staff will brief you. You'll be our errand personnel. And make sure you wear something clean." Toby arrived the next morning dressed in clothes clearly borrowed or dug up from old memories. He cleaned chairs, fetched water, ran errands and carried boxes, tasks once beneath him. The irony was inescapable. Customers who once saw him flaunting wealth with Clara now saw him delivering paper files and sweeping the shop's corridor. He never looked Chinyu in the eyes. Not once. He kept his head bowed, speaking only when spoken to. Staff whispered about him, but Chinyu told them, "He's one of us now. Let him work in peace." She wasn't seeking to humiliate him. In truth, her spirit had outgrown revenge. What she had wasn't revenge, it was redemption. She didn't gloat. She didn't parade his shame. She just lived her truth louder than his betrayal ever spoke. Ikenna noticed the internal storm she wrestled with and often reminded her with a soft whisper, "You're more than your scars." Still, Toby's presence brought occasional emotional tremors. Some nights Chinyu would cry alone in bed, not because she missed him, but because she couldn't believe she had once called this broken man her future. The same man who had let her fall on the altar now took orders from her assistants. The same man who had watched her collapse in disgrace now rushed to open doors for her clients. She sometimes sat back and observed him from the window, wondering if he ever truly loved her or merely loved what she gave. Ikenna, sensing her inner turmoil, would sit beside her during those quiet evenings, saying nothing, just letting silence be the comfort. "I loved a lie," she whispered one night. "No," Ikenna replied. "You loved a man who never deserved it. And now, that love has become someone else's second chance." Chinyu wiped her tears and smiled, not because she was healed, but because she knew healing was in progress. The news of Toby's fall from grace spread like wildfire. The same friends who once celebrated his success now laughed behind his back. Clara had disappeared with his funds and married a foreigner. His mother, Mama Alyarimi, had relocated after being evicted. None of the people who praised him came to help. He was now a man marked by disgrace, not because he failed, but because he had built his throne on betrayal. Chinyu, on the other hand, was now hosting local business forums, mentoring young women, and expanding her kiosk into a chain of stalls. She didn't shout her success. She simply lived it. When people asked how she did it, she would say, "I stopped watering dead plants." And when someone joked about her past, she would smile and reply, "Yes, I was broken, but I used the pieces to build a stronger home." Her life had become a silent thunder, shaking those who once mocked her, without making a sound. It was a public holiday when the final confrontation happened. Chinyu and Ikenna had closed shop early and were preparing to leave for a small staff picnic when a loud knock sounded at the office door. She opened it, and there stood Mama Alyarimi, the same woman who once called her just a cleaner. Her clothes were tattered, her skin paler than Chinyu remembered. Her eyes darted around nervously before finally settling on Chinyu. "My daughter, please," she began, voice shaking. "I have nowhere to go. They chased me from my sister's place. I heard Toby is working here now. Please forgive me." Chinyu stood in stunned silence. She hadn't seen this woman since the day Toby humiliated her. And now, that same voice that once thundered insults was begging. Behind Mama Alyurimi, Toby approached, his head bowed. "She has nowhere else," he murmured. Chinyu looked at both of them, her heart thudding, memories racing like wildfire through her mind. She stepped aside and let them in. They sat on the chairs she once couldn't afford, in an office she built from scratch. The same woman who once said she'd never amount to anything now sat with her hands on her knees, weeping softly. "I know we wronged you. I know we mocked you. But please, help us. Even if it's just food or a roof." Chinyu didn't respond for a while. She looked at Ikena, who sat silently beside her. Then she spoke. "There were days I starved so your son could eat. Nights I cried so hard I thought I'd die. You watched me give my soul to him, and you spat in my face. I forgave you long ago, but I won't carry your burden anymore." Mama Alyurimi cried harder. Toby knelt beside her, crying too. Chinyu inhaled deeply. "I'll pay for her shelter for 3 months. But that's where it ends. I'm not your savior. I'm just the woman you once threw away." As they left, Toby turned one last time. "Chinyu," he said, his voice trembling, "thank you." She nodded, but didn't speak. Ikena locked the door behind them, then turned to her. "Are you okay?" She nodded again. This time it was real. "I thought I needed revenge," she said slowly, "but I only needed peace." Ikena walked up to her and held her tightly. "Then let's walk in that peace together." That evening, they drove out with their staff and laughed around grilled fish and soft music. Chinyu stood under the moonlight, watching the people around her, feeling the breeze on her face. She had been mocked, disgraced, and discarded. But she had also risen, rebuilt, and found love. And now, with her head high and her heart free, she was no longer a woman trying to prove herself. She was a woman who had already won, not by defeating others, but by not letting them defeat her. Weeks passed after Mama Alyurimi's visit, and life continued for Chinyu, but with more peace than ever before. She was no longer haunted by the sound of Toby's voice or the memory of her disgrace. Instead, her mind focused on expansion. With Ikena's support, she launched New Life Foods, a branch of their venture dedicated solely to packaged snacks and deliveries. They hired more staff, trained young women who had similar stories of betrayal, and created a small empowerment circle where broken dreams could be reborn. Chinyu didn't need grand platforms or TV interviews. Her success spoke for itself. Her compound was now lined with 2 cars and her children, 3 beautiful adopted kids, called her Mummy Chinyu with pride. Her smile had returned fully, not forced or hidden behind pain, but rooted in self-love and stability. She had built a life where her scars were part of the structure, not its weakness, but its foundation. Toby still worked in the same office, now quiet and obedient. He had become more respectful, more reserved. Chinyu noticed how he avoided eye contact, how he arrived early, stayed late, and never caused trouble. She occasionally greeted him like any staff member, politely but with distance. One Friday evening, as she locked up, he approached her outside the gate. "I just want to say thank you," he began nervously, "for not treating me the way I treated you. I ruined your life once, and yet you gave me work. That's more than I deserved." Chinyu looked at him calmly. "I didn't give you work because you deserve it. I gave it because I healed." Toby swallowed hard, clearly moved. "I'll never stop being sorry." She nodded. "You don't need to. I stopped waiting for an apology the day I found my peace." With those words, she turned and walked to her car, Ikena waiting at the driver's side, holding the door open for her like a king would for his queen. That night, she sat in her bedroom with Ikena, watching their children play outside. The sun had dipped, casting golden hues over the compound. "It still feels like a dream," she whispered. "That someone like me, someone they all mocked, now has this." Ikena wrapped his arm around her shoulder. "You don't have this, because you were perfect. You have it because you endured, and you never stopped believing in yourself. Chinyu leaned into him, her eyes misty. I loved the wrong man. I stole for him. I gave him everything. Ikena kissed her forehead gently. And yet you still had more to give. That's not weakness, Chinyu. That's power. Outside, laughter echoed. Inside, her heart was full. She didn't win by taking revenge. She won by surviving, thriving, and outgrowing every storm that tried to bury her. The closure she found wasn't in Toby's apology, it was in the mirror, every morning, when she saw the woman she became. The grand opening of the newest New Light branch was held in a bustling part of town, where Chinyu's story had once been a source of gossip and ridicule. This time, however, it was celebration that filled the air. The new location boasted a modern food processing section, training center, and a sleek office complex named after Chinyu's late father, the Obina Building. Community leaders came, former clients, market women, and even distant relatives who once cut ties with her. They all showed up in admiration. Chinyu arrived in a navy blue gown, modest yet regal, stepping out of her black SUV with Ikena and their 3 kids in tow. Cameras clicked, not to mock her, but to capture her eyes. A once scorned woman had become the face of strength and empowerment. During the event, she was asked to speak. She took the mic gently and said, "I don't stand here today because life was kind to me. I stand here because I refuse to stay buried in the places I was broken." After the event, Chinyu walked quietly to a corner of the compound, reflecting. Her journey had not been easy. It had taken everything: her pride, her innocence, her belief in people. But what it gave in return was far more precious. She no longer lived for validation. Her happiness wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. She no longer sought to prove herself to a world that once turned its back on her. Instead, she honored herself, every version of the woman she had been: the poor girl who loved too much, the cleaner who gave her salary to a man who betrayed her, the woman who stood alone at an altar, and the fighter who rebuilt her life piece by piece. All of those women lived inside her. And today they stood tall, crowned not with revenge, but with resilience. Chinyu had become a symbol, not of perfection, but of perseverance. As the sun set, Ikena joined her in the corner. "You disappeared for a moment," he said. She smiled. "I was talking to the old me, telling her thank you for not giving up." Ikena nodded. "She deserves it." Their children ran up to them, laughing and holding the keys to her new office. Chinyu lifted the youngest into her arms. "You see this place?" she said softly. "Your mother built it from tears." The little girl nodded innocently. "Tears are powerful," she replied. Chinyu kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yes. But what you do after the tears, that's what makes you unstoppable." The wind blew gently through the trees. The woman once mocked, disgraced, left at the altar with nothing, now had everything money couldn't buy: peace, love, legacy. She had been crowned not with gold, but with scars. And to her, that was the most beautiful crown of all. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.